Honestly, HDB rules are the most complex and complicated. Really, who came up with all this? I mean, there are so many rules, so many schemes, so many restrictions. And it seems a couple of do's and don'ts here conflict with regulations here and there. So, which is right? And reading the HDB website doesn't seem to help either. The text can be quite ambiguous and subjected to interpretation. And what do most of us do? We clarify with HDB. And we still get the same generic answers from the website. So how? Must you really ask a property agent? Are you afraid that you feel sort of obligated to use an agent after you willingly approach one for a session? Bottom line is buying a HDB property rocket science? Well, I believe it is in some way, especially for the not so straightforward scenarios. So I sat down in front of my computer for a few days and started drawing a flowchart. Eventually, I came up with 7 groups of people who are property buyers, potentially for HDB flats and ECs as well. And then I attempt to break down what type of properties they can buy and cannot buy. If you belong to any of these 7 groups, married couples, singles, Singapore PRs, foreigners, divorcees, widows and widowers, and orphans, let me attempt to enlighten you on your choices of home ownership here in Singapore. Before I start, let me caveat this video with a few things. First, I'm not a rocket scientist working at HDB. So, while I do my utmost diligence in trying to get the facts in this video right, there could exist the possibility that things aren't correct anymore, especially if you watch this video sometime after it was published. Also, I will be expressing some of my own opinions later in this video. Those are really my own sentiments which you might not agree upon. It's okay for you to disagree with me and even state your adverse opinions in the comments. But I ask for your understanding that what I'll be presenting here would be subjective too. Okay? With this out of the way, let us get started with the 7 groups of buyers. Now, the first group of buyers have the most benefits. And it's no wonder because the government wants to encourage marriage. So Singaporean married couples, or at least the fiancé and fiancée applying for a flat, have the least restrictions. So if you are a married couple above 21 years of age, you can buy any new flat or EC so long it's your first or second time applying for one. And if you are buying a resale, you still qualify for grants for your first or second flat. However, your combined salary cannot be higher than 14,000 if you want to buy a new flat or 16,000 for an EC. Of course, in the case of resales HDB, new and old private properties, there's no income ceiling for you. So, if you are still thinking about whether to get married, for the sake of getting an affordable enough HDB home of your own, away from your parents, it's probably good enough reason to settle down soon. But what if you're single and Singaporean? What properties can you buy? Well, you're not left out completely. You can still buy some HDB properties, but you have to be at least 35 years old. Unlike married couples who can buy anything, you can only buy new 2-room flats in general or any resale flats and ECs except a 2-room flat designated as prime. Income ceilings apply to you as a single too, but it's half of that for couples. That is 7,000 for a BTO. What about your income ceiling for ECs? Well, remember, you can't buy a new EC alone, but you can actually buy one as long as you can form a core family nucleus. This means if you apply with another single Singaporean, even if you are unrelated, you are eligible to buy a new EC and the income ceiling would then be the normal 16,000. Told you it's confusing, right? If you don't want to crack your brain over all this, just get private housing or ask an agent for your options, okay? If you're a Singapore PR, you still have pretty good options to buy a flat here. But it gets a little complex. Now, if you're a PR but your spouse is a Singapore citizen, congrats! You're eligible to buy anything as any Singaporean married couple could. The usual 14,000 and 16,000 income ceilings apply for new PTOs and new ECs. The restriction comes in when both you and your spouse are SPRs. In this case, you can only buy resale flats or ECs, but there's a big criteria here. Both of you must hold PR status for at least 3 years. Well, at least you can still buy a flat, unlike foreigners, which I'm discussing next. Now, if you're thinking of renting out your entire flat once MOP is up, this is not an option for flats which are fully owned by SPRs. You can consider renting out rooms though. This next group of home buyers of Singapore property has the most straightforward restrictions out of the 7 groups. I'm talking about the foreigners group. Unfortunately, because HDB flats and ECs are subsidized housing meant for Singapore citizens and PRs, as a foreigner, you don't qualify for this perk. In fact, if you are buying a residential property here, you will be further taxed in the form of additional buyer's stamp duty unless you are from certain tax-exempted countries. In a nutshell, you can only buy private properties here, either new or resale. But then again, not all private properties. You can't own land titles here, so you can only purchase landed properties that are strata title as cluster landed, approved for sale to foreigners before April 2012, or those in Sentosa Island. What happens if a person is divorced and wants to buy a flat? In the eyes of the law here, a divorcee is considered a single, so she can't buy a flat or EC, new or resale, unless she is 35 or older. So that means if she's divorced before she turns 35, she'll be forced to sell her HDB property. Well, unless she takes over that property with her child. Then, with a family nucleus, she can keep the property. And similarly, if she didn't have a HDB property in the first place, with a child, she can buy one as long as she's at least 21 years of age. So, put simply, if one is divorced between 21 to 34, that person can't own a flat or EC, unless she forms a new family nucleus with her child or parent for the matter. But if she's 35 or older, she can have a HDB like any Singaporean single. For someone who's widowed, HDB seems to take a more compassionate approach. A widow's case can be seen as similar to a divorcee's case, except that if she's between 21 to 34, she gets to keep her flat. This is regardless if she has a child or not. So similarly, if a widow wants to buy a flat before she turns 34, she's allowed to. And in this case, she's treated as any Singaporean single, except that rule on 35 years old doesn't apply. Of course, if an older widow wants to apply for a flat with a child as a co-owner who is above 21 years old, she can. But frankly, I think it's wiser to keep the child's name out so that her child doesn't waste his 2 opportunities. Orphans are treated similar to widows and widowers, but it gets rather complicated when it comes to buying a HDB property. Now first, an orphan is termed as the child who lost both parents, not one. Second, the age of the orphan plays a large role. And third, whether his parents are citizen or PR matters too. So, if an orphan is above 35 years of age, he can apply for a flat like any Singaporean single. That includes the option of buying one with another unrelated Singaporean single. If the orphan is 21 to 34, then he can apply for a BTO flat or EC so long as one of the deceased parents was a citizen or PR. Of course, income ceilings of 7,000 and 8,000, which is half that of couples, apply. Now, the worst case scenario happens when the orphan is below 21 years old. That becomes more of a legal matter. Essentially, while the young orphan can inherit the flat, he cannot take ownership until he's 21. So, buying a HDB property, be it a flat or an EC, is extremely confusing. There are different restrictions for different groups of buyers, and even within each group, there are more rules and regulations too. Even to many property agents, we honestly need to consult other agents, our notes, or with HDB themselves sometimes. In fact, there are some extremely complicated cases that even HDB officers can get stumped. So, I reckon it's best to ask HDB themselves if you don't understand what you've read on their website. Otherwise, consult an agent. While property agents are not Google, which means they might not be able to answer every one of your questions, you should understand that they are bound by regulations to give rightful answers and advice. So, they better go and make sure they answer you correctly. But anyway, here's my advice to you for all 7 groups. I say this not as a property agent, but as a homeowner who's applied for a BTO before, stayed in several flats, owned a private property, and rented also. Oh, and having lived through and experienced decades of property prices that are ever increasing here. For orphans and widows, don't give up your property if you can. I'm referring to the average income people, not those ultra-rich you watch in dramas. If there are no squabbles or contests, continue to take ownership of your existing property. If you didn't have one before, try to get one as soon as possible, even at BTO. A subsidized flat, even the cheapest one in the most ulu part of a new town, is still a roof over your head and a title you own. And over time, most properties should appreciate in price, and that will be an assurance for you. For divorcees, if the flat bears too many sad memories, it might be a better idea to sell. It goes against my mantra of owning a home, but I understand it can get really complicated if you choose to still live in that property that's not necessarily a home anymore. With the proceeds from the sales of the property, get another one if you can. If not, bunk in with your parents for a while until you are 35. Then get a smaller flat first. After that, then decide. Because like I always say, most properties would appreciate in price, so it would be good if you can eventually own one. For foreigners, I'm sorry to put it out to you that the era of buying cheap properties here in Singapore is over. Yes, it's still possible to eventually make some money even after the rather hefty ABSD, but it will be for the long term, and that means you have to buy the correct property if it's for investment. Well, unless you're perfectly fine with losing a huge sum solely for the sake of owning a penthouse here, in which case my recommendation for any foreigners who don't consider yourself among the ultra-high net worth, renting might be the better bet. For SPRs couples, there's a reason you wanted to get your PR status in Singapore, right? And I believe it's for the long term. Well, if you can afford a private property, do go for that. That's because ABSD is somewhat negligible for your first property here, especially when you compare that to what foreigners have to pay. But if you can't afford a private, budget for 3 years of rental, then quickly go buy a resale HDB. Almost every SPR family I know, especially Malaysians, will aspire to or already have owned a resale flat here. Yes, it's not cheap compared to the properties in your country, but ownership beats rental anytime. And if you plan on staying long-term here in Singapore, I really urge you to buy a property here. For singles, well, even if you have the benefit of staying rent-free with your parents, my recommendation is really to get your own property as soon as possible. If you can afford a private property of at least a 2-bedroom apartment, do it as early as you can. If you prefer to invest less with a HDB, then do it soonest at 35, saving as much as you can before that. The reason is the longer you wait, the older you get and the lesser loan you can take. And in today's job market, this means the more risky it will be for you if you lose your job. You won't believe how many singles have approached me for options, and unfortunately for many of them, it was already too late for them. They really don't have any avenues left except to take over the old flat from their parents. Lastly, for married couples, as Singaporeans, I believe it is our right to own a HDB flat. Ask any foreigner, and I bet they have nothing but praises for our public housing. And as much as many Singaporeans are complaining about our government, not many will complain about the livability of HDB flats. So when you get married and you can't afford a private property yet, or you can't see yourself squeezing into a tiny 600 square feet condo, get yourself a flat, even a BTO. Not many agents will recommend you to get a BTO simply because we can't earn any commission if you get one. But as a homeowner and a fellow Singaporean, honestly, when I touch my heart, a BTO, even at the worst location today, is better than any public housing in other countries. And as of today, I believe our BTOs are still relatively affordable for most of us. Okay, I hope you gained some insights in this video, especially when you're thinking of buying a HDB property soon. By the way, my name is Jessica, and nope, I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm just an agent who's been trying my best. Well, if you wish to speak to me for any reason, feel free to WhatsApp me. Otherwise, do like and share this video and subscribe to my channel, okay? I'll see you in the next one.